Welcome to Uncover the Human, where every conversation revolves around enhancing all the connections in our lives.
Whether that's with our families, co-workers, or even ourselves.
When we can be our authentic selves, magic happens.
This is Cristina Amigoni.
And this is Alex Colomore.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. Today, Cristina and I are joined by our guest, Kristin Malek. Welcome to the podcast, Kristin.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome to the podcast.
We've worked with Kristin in a couple different capacities, but for background for our audience, Kristin, you want to tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kristin Malek, and I currently do a lot of things, as Alex and Cristina know, but I run a company called the BCD Institute, which is the Behavior Change Design Institute. I also run my own event venue called the Gathering Grove based in Nebraska in the United States. And then I also teach event and experience design at my local university. So I do a lot of different things. I like to keep a full schedule, I'll say.
And a full travel schedule lately.
I do. I travel all over the world running events, designing events, running workshops, doing keynotes. I run my own podcast, so this is really fun, always to be a guest on other people's podcasts. Yeah, a super full schedule. But essentially my background information at a very high level is I started in event planning and logistics, and I was an executive director of events for a large event planning company in Las Vegas. So my minimum client was $1 million or 1,500 people. And I was running a lot of medical events at the time. And I remember very distinctly at the end of one of the meetings, the large annual conference that happened in February. We won actually several awards in the event industry for this event. And I had that sneaking thought, you know how those sneaking thoughts go. I had this sneaking thought and I said, did this actually matter? Did this have an impact? Did these 2,000 doctors who showed up to this event, did they actually learn anything? Are they actually going to change their practice based on this meeting? And that thought took a life of its own. So I decided that in that moment that I was going to only design events and experiences that changed mindset and behavior. And so I had to figure out how to do that. And so to figure out how to do that, I dove deep into neuroscience and psychology, behavioral science, change management, communications, hypnosis, neurolinguistics, all of these fun fields. Spent 10 years traveling all across these industries, 30 certifications, 8 industries, PhD, all of this ridiculous, like overpriced formal education things, and a ton of real life lived experience to figure out how we can actually design events that change mindset and behavior. And that's led into all kinds of other things that are not event related in terms of marketing and communications and public speaking and all the fun things.
So a full schedule then.
Full schedule.
Yes. So how do you change mindset and behavior in 7 words or less?
7 words or less. Reaching the subconscious mind. Reaching the subconscious mind. That is it. End of podcast right there.
And we're done.
Well,
we're
no
done.
Explanation needed. We all know how to do that.
Exactly, right? My whole entire field is moot now.
Yeah. 10 years of 30 certifications and travels. That's what it comes down to.
That's what it comes down to. You've got to reach the unconscious or subconscious mind. Different fields call it different things, unconscious or subconscious. You got to reach it, and then you've got to plant some seeds that will take root. Yes, that is the end of how you change mindset and behavior. How you do that, though? How you do that?
Yes. So mandating, forcing, commanding, threatening, none of those.
None of those. Actually, that creates a huge defensive barrier. So we don't want to do those things. We want to I always say that I'm an architect of curiosity. I'm always trying to design for curiosity because curiosity will kind of bypass some of those critical wedges or that barrier or that block between your conscious and unconscious mind, and then you'll really be able to play around and have some fun, obviously, with curiosity in mind. So
that is a really cool way of describing it, and I'm curious how one helps implant some curiosity, because we could definitely use some of the help.
Definitely
Well,
could.
I think when you look at the fields in general, when we're talking about whether it's an online marketing or email campaign or segmentation, whether we're talking about live events or even mail campaigns, we're really focusing on this hyper personalization right now. And when we talk about sales or marketing, we're talking about changing behavior in a form of whether ethical or unethical, changing behavior to get people to buy your product, right? And in order to do that, you have to understand how that individual person works or makes decisions or makes reasons. And that's why we have this focus on this personalization, hyper personalization, trying to understand who you are, your habits, your scrolling habits, your buying habits, how you tick, because that's really the key to understanding what's going to open up your mind, what's going to allow you to be curious. And then in my field, very ethically aligning with your values, being authentic, aligning with authenticity, and really figuring out where people want to go in life, what's your goal in a year or in 2 years or in 5 years, and how can we adjust that mindset or behavior to get you to those goals, not necessarily to buy another product that you don't need that's going to end up in the ocean, right? So there are people out there that are highly trained in this that are using it for, capitalism or corporate greed, and there are people who are doing it to really help make an impact, and I like to think I'm part of the latter.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like some of the current influence ones or some of the current tools in a lot of the marketing space are understanding people's habits so you can plug into where they already are. And it sounds like you're asking more like, what do we do to change the habits so that we can have a different outcome rather than just using the existing habits for our good. So the algorithms that we're all used to on social media just serving us the things that we already have clicked rather than serving us something that's going to change how we're thinking or what we're doing.
Yeah, well, there's some really interesting research in there across different fields. There was one research study where someone created a brand new social media account with no background information, fake name, fake everything. And they did a series of these, so that it wasn't just one. It was a giant experimental study. They had a lot of different fake accounts, different IPNs, different computers, different all the things. And they clicked one video or post or liked something that was a little bit left or a little bit right leaning, right? A little bit liberal or a little bit conservative. And then they tracked that over 2 weeks. And by the end of 2 weeks, and then by the end of 30 days, by the end of 6 weeks, they were like completely on the extreme edges and the fringes where it's like, okay, if artificial intelligence or technology or the algorithm, if it indicates that you kind of like something, the purpose of these platforms, especially social media, is to capture your attention. So they're going to keep giving you things that you have told it that you like. And so even if you're like a little curious, you're like, oh, I'm kind of interested about that. Maybe I'll like that post, or maybe I'll comment, or maybe I'll share. By the end of 6 weeks, you're in like total extreme territory because they're trying to keep you on the platform. And so that's really dangerous because those platforms or that messaging or that algorithm or that style can really change mindset and behavior, but not in a positive way.
So, as an architect of curiosity, how do you plant curiosity, plant seeds of curiosity, but also plant it in a way that it keeps the mind open to different points of view? So not just going down this path that then it's now blindfolded path to the extreme.
Absolutely. It's a different answer depending on the situation, right? How I write a book or coach people to write books, or how I am a keynote speaker or coach people in keynote speaking versus planning a live event. I am running a workshop next week, or long past by the time this airs, right? I'm running a workshop, and how I plan that versus 100-person or 1,000-person event, that's all going to be a little different in terms of how you structure the flow. But I'll say it really does come down to the flow and then connecting with the pain points at the beginning. So if you are an individual, a coach, somebody that I'm working with one-on-one or one in a small group, I can look at you individually, target market, sociodemographics, my knowledge of you, some history in the background, maybe some interviews, depending if it's like a boardroom or a CEO or what the change is that we're looking for. And I can identify some of the pain points, right? You've posted something or you've said something, you've expressed a criticism or a complaint somewhere, right? And I can relate to you on that, right? I am now relatable. I've built rapport with you. And then I think where a lot of people go wrong, I know where a lot of people go wrong, is they try to just replace negative or one point of view with the extreme positive or a different point of view. And they skip the neutrality point. And getting to neutral is really, really important. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have to replace a mindset with another mindset, but you can't go from one extreme to another, right? If you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm so fat, you can't just start saying positive affirmations of like, I'm the skinniest person in the world. Like your brain doesn't believe it, right? If you're like poor and collections is coming after you and you have no money, you're not even making it paycheck to paycheck. And then your positive affirmation is, I'm a millionaire. It will never stick. There's truth in this manifesting thing, but it has to be believable for your brain, right? And so many people are skipping that middle step. You have to get to neutrality. So instead of saying, I'm fat or I'm poor, and going to the extreme, you could just say, I'm working on my health every day. That's believable for your brain. You have action. You're moving in the right direction, right? And you get your brain to that point, and then you're like, I'm okay with how I look right now. And you get to that point, and then you're like, I'm happy with how I look right now, right? So it steps in a process. I always try to break things down into 3 or 5 steps, depending on how much the change is. Same with money. You can't go from I'm not making it paycheck to paycheck to I'm a millionaire. You have to get to I can make it paycheck to paycheck. And then I can save, or I will be saving, or I am saving. I love saving. And then you continue with the steps. And people skip the steps. They're always trying to go to extremes. Now, to answer your question in a broader context, if I'm doing things for a large group, for a book or a keynote, or a larger conference, then you have to make sure you hit more pain points at the beginning so that way everyone can feel connected to the story, which gets them a little curious of like, hey, they seem to understand me. I wonder if I should listen, right? Or wow, they really pegged me. I should keep an open mind as I'm listening. Or maybe they have an answer to a problem that I'm looking for, right? So you're trying to just pique that curiosity spike there. And in the field of experience design, we talk about designing for emotions. That's a very, very popular concept. If you look up experience design, emotional design is very big. I always design for curiosity, and there's a big controversial discussion right now if curiosity is an emotion or not.
Interesting.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. I'm of the mindset that curiosity is a state of being, which bundles a lot of different emotions. But some people will say curiosity is an emotion itself. Anyways, that's probably beyond the scope of what you care about on this podcast. But
That could be a whole podcast
No,
in
I like
itself.
that a lot. That's super
I know. Now I'm actually thinking
we
about
could talk
that.
for hours. I'm such a geek about all of this stuff. I love it from all the different perspectives. Like every field, which is often siloed, neuroscience and psychology and behavioral science, but they all overlap. And I'm a true polymath. I love finding the overlaps and then combining them in ways that make a real impact.
I mean, I feel I'm going to go ahead and quickly personally recover from the calling out of like, oh, I've definitely jumped the gun on the spectrum of going from like, oh, way too negative to trying to jump to the opposite, whether for myself or to in suggestions to other people or hopes for other people. And it makes sense that there would be this kind of like go back to the beginning, take some steps throughout. And I like that idea of just poking or piquing the curiosity through that immediate relatability first, so people can believe like, okay, you do understand where I'm at, you understand what I'm doing, and that makes a lot of sense just from a relatability standpoint of, okay, you've been here, I might be able to trust what you have to say because you do seem to understand what I feel internally I have experienced. And that makes sense to go start there, and that's definitely something that I think it's sometimes hard to have the patience for when you feel like you know where you want to go. But it does make sense that maybe you can't just make the leap from negative a million to a positive a million.
There's so many, I'm part of, as you can imagine, so many groups, so many associations, so many online community groups. And I love the manifesting ones when people are on there and they're like trying to manifest and they're like, this isn't working. And everyone's just like, be stronger, repeat it, visualize, like put everything up on a poster, like cut out your vision board. And there's serious truth to that. And there's real brain science that supports manifesting. But they're skipping the part where it has to be believable. You have to truly believe it to like have that energy to attract it. And everyone's skipping that step. They don't want to talk about it. Like that's the important step right there. It has to be believable, right?
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
That makes
So
a
the
lot of
curiosity
sense.
then allows you like that space between like what is next believable, even if it doesn't currently feel true, and allows you to take that small step rather than the curiosity that will be defeated in trying to leap the Grand Canyon all in one bound.
Exactly. And having some, I would say, movement words, especially if you're doing anything in writing or speaking, or even for yourself for the future. It's hard to sit there when you're barely making your bills, right? Or you hate working out or running or eating healthy. It's hard to use the I am language. And that's what we always like to say. That's what we like to write. That's what we like to put in our emails and on our vision boards. You're like, I am healthy. I am a person who loves working out. And it's just not true. And your brain doesn't see it as true. So having that movement language can really help you get there of like, I am working. I am increasing. I am, being a better person every day, right? So having some of those, that movement language can really help. And that also really helps in communication, any kind of marketing, in, books, in all of the things. Having movement language can really help move people along.
Yeah, definitely. I had all sorts of thoughts. They're all gone. So
I've changed your mind.
I know. Now I'm in the sea of, oh yes, now I got one back. Okay. So the interesting part is that it sounds like, and I've experienced it myself, like for ourselves, we tend to go to the extreme, or we think that going to the extreme is what's going to work. Like, and both ways, like from positive to absolutely negative and from negative to absolutely positive without taking the steps. And yet I find that it's easy to recognize when somebody else is doing it and you're like, but that's not going to work. Why did you just go to the extreme? It doesn't make any sense.
Yes. No, it's definitely easier to tell in other people than ourselves. And I think therapy has really figured this out in so many ways. A lot of the training modalities, I'm trained at a superficial, like introductory level across like 3 different therapy modes. And one of the questions that all 3 of them tend to ask is, if your friend was in this situation, how would you advise them? Because it's always easier to see it objectively when it's somebody else and to give maybe a less emotional response. Because in our brains, we always like to make up stories, right? We like to fill in blanks. We like to find reasoning for the things that aren't reasonable. We like to find conclusion in whatever way that looks. Our brains also feel negative a lot more. So one piece of negative information actually takes 20 pieces of positive information to overact. And so when we're in an environment, I mean, at least in the United States, I can't speak globally, where a lot of our news is maybe fear-based or negative, that it makes total sense to me why we're having mental health crises in so much of our country. Even in London, there's a minister of loneliness now. That's a real government position because loneliness is so real. So when we're looking at information in our brain, having negative information takes 20 pieces of positive information. And we do like to go to the extremes. I have a daughter, she's almost 10. She likes to do the what if. Well, mom, what if this insert catastrophic situation happens, right? And so we actually made a rule in our house where we were like, every time you say a what if that's negative, you have to say a 5 what ifs that's positive. Now, obviously, it's not 20, but it definitely makes her sit there and pause before she says this what if statement, right? So she's like, what if, all my friends decide at school tomorrow that they're not going to play with me on the playground? I'm like, what if tomorrow you're the most popular girl on the playground, right? Or what if all these positive things, and it drives you crazy. And now there's almost no what if negative statements in my house. So it kind of helps. We're just like retraining our brains, if that makes sense.
That helps a lot. Yeah, I'm glad that she's not around me with that what if, because I would have been like, well, that happened to me in 3rd grade and in 5th grade and then in freshman year in high school and freshman year in college. And then when I was 49 years old. So brace yourself.
Exactly. Well, and you're also training when you're making, pathways or connections between different points in your brain. If you're focused on negative things, you will kind of accidentally call more negative things into your life because that's the things you're focused on, right? You could have all these amazing things happening or opportunities for amazing things happening, but if you're like, oh, I can't bid for that proposal, I'll never get it, or oh, I should never apply for that job because I'm not 100% qualified, right? Or I should not go for that client, right? You're just shitting yourself to death, right? SHOULD, shitting.
Yes, we use that a lot on the podcast.
Right?
Yes,
Exactly. So you want to focus on the positive, right? In a believable, authentic way.
for sure. Yeah, we've actually banned the words should and just from our company lingo.
Good. Absolutely. Everyone who's listening should, right?
Should just
They
not
should just
use
do
should
that.
and
Right?
just.
They should also adopt those policies, right? You need to adopt those. If you say need, though, you're putting up barriers and blocks.
Yes.
Nobody likes to be told what they need to do, right? So language becomes really important.
You get to not use these words.
You have the wonderful opportunity to
There you go.
choose to elect this type of positive language in your company culture.
I'm still hung up on the 1 to 20 ratio. I've heard like 1 to 10 sometimes, and that already felt insurmountable, and now it's doubled. So that's
Well, I'm sure
That's
there's,
good.
if you're getting all like nerdy and statistical, I'm sure there's some kind of, range depending on how negative the original, mode is. If it's this level of negative, it only takes 10, but if it's like real fear-based, it takes 20, right? So I'm sure there's a scale in there somewhere.
There's probably the level of positive that then comes into. So if you're all the way to the negative, extreme negative, and all the positives are like, well, it's not that bad, then you may need 100 of those.
Well, you two are so wonderful in what you do in working with teams and team culture, and you already know some of the amazing research that's out there that sits there and says, okay, if you're in a in-person environment, right? We've all heard the expression, I think, at this point, like you are the culmination of the 6 or 7 people you hang around the most, right? And so whether you believe that or not, like the 6 people you hang around the most, you will pick up habits, behaviors, energies from them. And there's some really fascinating research that came out during the pandemic, like even being in an office environment with people that you're not actively interacting with, if you're around highly motivated people who are doing their work, that energy fills the air and then you are more productive and highly motivated. If you're surrounded by people who are, I still use like the Facebook farm bill. That definitely dates me like way back in the day. But like if you are sitting around people who are not motivated, they don't like their job, they're not happy, they don't want to be there. Even if you are a highly motivated and productive person, your productivity like actually drops. That's actual science research that's been done on that. And so it's just really important to think about when you're talking about negative and positive or energy or environments or climate or culture, marketing, messaging, it's all, but it has to be believable. That's so important, right? You can't I sit there and think of all the companies I work with, and you have the president or the CEO, and they send out their email, and they're like, everything is great, and you're like, you don't understand my life, right? It's not great, right? So it has to be believable, right?
Yeah, I think we've all received a few of those emails where like
Yeah,
everything's great, and then you just like look around at the dumpster fires that are surrounding you, and you're like, is it though?
yeah.
I'm not
And
sure
that's
that's true.
about 7 days before 10,000, 1,000 people get laid off. I'm like, I thought everything was great.
Or the
Is
toxic
this
What happened?
positivity, right? Toxic positivity on the whole other end of the spectrum of like, you just want to ignore everything. And I mean, I am a positive person. I am a very forward thinking, visionary, like generally happy person. But sometimes you have to acknowledge, you have to acknowledge it at the beginning because you have to make that relatable. Like, hey, this climate sucks, but we are actively moving towards something better. We need your help, right? To make all of this better because we're all part of it. I love how we're going like all over these topics. I'm like,
One thing I'm curious about is how this feels internally for you. What's your internal monologue like when you kind of catch yourself in maybe a time where you're like, hey, I would like to change my own behavior on something, or here's something I'm realizing that I'm falling down a slope of something. What does that sound like internally? Do you find these things useful? Do you catch yourself in them? Do you fall for the traps that we all end up falling
yeah,
for?
it's a great question. I'm going to answer that in two parts because one, again, relatable. I think it will be super relatable to everybody in the situation they're in. And then I'll give the now that I'm like highly trained in these things, how I still go into it. So when I was in my first neuroscience training, it was a very specific training. I spent like $30,000 for a week. Like insane how much some of this information is gatekept, right? And I was sitting there in this training. It was live in person. There was 20 people in the room. And I'm learning about how our brain processes information, right? The conscious and unconscious mind. And we're talking about filters, right? And so how our brain creates filters and what they mean. And the in-depth discussion is like way beyond the scope of this podcast. But essentially, your brain has no filters between 0 and 7, right? So your brain takes everything as truth, right? And at the time I took this training, my daughter was little, right? She was like 3 or 4. And I'm in this training, and my first thought, I can so distinctly remember, I like put my head in my hands, and I was like, oh shit, how have I screwed up my child already? I was so like, what ads has she seen? What arguments has she overheard? What marketing? Like what's on the billboards and the sign? What messages are in the cartoons? Like what are all these things, right? Because the brain has no filter between 0 and 7. And during that time period, your brain's taking everything as truth, and it's creating all of these filters that will then dictate your entire life unless you understand and acknowledge that they exist and actively work towards cleaning them or removing them or adjusting them. And that was just definitely my first thought is like, oh no, like why there was lots of expletives. I only said one on the podcast, but there was a lot in my brain. Okay. And I don't say expletives very often, but I was like, oh my gosh. And then you have mom guilt, right? Parent guilt when you're like, oh no, what's happened? And now I'm so highly trained in all of this. And I will tell you, you will always need a mirror back, right? You work through some of your things so unconsciously through your filters that you don't even realize that you're doing some things. That's how our body can function because we have so many inputs, way more, like 11 million inputs, like bits per second, that our body and our brain are trying to process, and we can only actually handle like 134 to 150, right? And then we talk about chunking, that's beyond the scope here. So our brains can only process this much, so there's a huge difference. So our brains are creating these filters, and I like to think of it like a Coinstar or coin sorting machine, where our brain has a filter or a sorter that's like, okay, all this stuff is just getting straight deleted. So the expression, did that go in one ear and out the other? You didn't even pay attention to it because at some point you made a decision, maybe when you were younger, maybe 0 to 7, that you decided that this did not matter. And your brain is like, I'm so overwhelmed. This doesn't matter. I'm just getting rid of it. right? And unfortunately, some of those things are actually really important. So it's really helpful to have someone there to be like, hey, do you understand that you're doing this? I always say self-awareness is the key to transformation. I always have a coach or a therapist or an accountability friend or a community group where we can express things fully and where we're honest and direct and authentic with each other, where we're sitting there saying, not out of hatred or criticism, but to be like, hey, I don't know if you know that you do this, right? Self-awareness is the key to transformation. I joined Toastmasters a long time ago for that. I didn't know that I had so many filler words, particularly so, and I can feel every time I say and in this podcast, and there's a lot, okay? Because I'm self-aware that I know that this is a problem. I just pause.
We'll use AI to take them all
Thank you.
out. We'll say like, look for ends and so from Kristin, take them out.
Kristin will be
Exactly.
super stilted.
When
just
I
all
went,
of it.
but when I started Toastmasters, I didn't know I did that. It took somebody sitting there saying, "Do you know you said so 30 times in 5 minutes?" And me being like, "No, I didn't. I had no idea." Sometimes you just need someone to point things out to you, and so that's where now I'm using that. Yes, I still have those issues. I'm much more open to surrounding myself with the right people who are going to be a good mirror back to me of things that I want to work on. That's a long answer, but
No,
Yeah.
that's a great
Yeah.
answer. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. On a total tangent, I'm a huge proponent of, rather than the college fund for kids, the therapy fund for kids. It's like, I can't go back in time, so let's start putting money into your future therapy needs.
yes.
Because also, especially at this point, who knows what's going to happen to college given AI and technology changes. So let's put money in the therapy fund.
Well, and I also think, that could be a whole nother podcast, but I think so often the end all be all therapy modality is CBT, which is, very a CBT therapy. It's very talk heavy. It's a talk therapy. And when you actually realize that your brain is 5% conscious brain and 95% unconscious or subconscious brain, when you talk about why isn't therapy working, or I'm just doing a lot of talking and nothing's changing, CBT therapy is only targeting that 5%. So it takes a long time, if ever, to actually have effective change. It depends on how much you can actually talk through your unconscious or subconscious mind, which will change from person to person. There's all these other therapy modalities now that most people aren't even talking about. Internal family systems is probably the one that I start recommending, IFS, to everybody who's wanting to start working with their unconscious or subconscious brain. A lot of times people like to go to EMDR and tapping, and those are very valid. I find them to be more of like a support for things that you're working for. But there's a reason why a lot of EMDR therapists are now training in IFS or internal family systems, because internal family systems can really help sort through what's actually happening in your unconscious brain. And then EMDR and tapping can help reinforce that. Anyways, that's like Kristin Malek's, Dr. K's, unofficial recommendations, right? So you take that. If you're like, no, I'm such a huge proponent, awesome. I'm so glad that works for you. That's just what I found over the years with a lot of different people.
Well, having
was my
started
next
my
question,
therapy,
so.
oh yeah,
What are your recommendations? But hey, that's good.
yeah, exactly. Well, having started my therapy journey way too late in life, about almost a year ago at this point, so definitely way too late in life. But and having started with a combination of EMDR and IFS, I could definitely see how those are, for me especially, more powerful and helpful than just straight talk therapy.
And I think in talk therapy, it's, first of all, we have a huge shortage of therapists, right, in our world, and especially in the United States. When you're talking about talk therapy, it's so dependent on the training of the therapist, right? Where are they asking the right questions? Are they how are they connecting with you? What's the rapport they built? Blah, blah, blah. In internal family systems, it's really a facilitation of your conversation with yourself. And it's a totally different mindset where they're just asking the questions of like, well, percentages, or how does that feel, or some of that woo-woo fringe stuff that's actually really important for the unconscious mind. That's in a very science-backed method. Somatic therapy is the same as well, but I recommend that maybe after IFS or EMDR. So yeah.
That's my next step.
When I was
Somatic
invited on
therapy.
the podcast, I didn't know it would be a whole therapy thing, but this is so great. This is wonderful. So.
Yeah, our conversations are either providing some kind of therapy or talking about therapy. Those
Yes,
are
recommending therapy. Or sharing our journey with therapy.
Yes. Yes, I actually use a lot of different techniques when I'm designing mindset and behavior change, whether that's sound. I am actually like a sound healer. I'm like certified up through sound healing. I'll use sound as a reinforcement. I'll use techniques in IFS or breath work, or not as the main part, but as a reinforcing or opening up of mindset, or getting rid of some of the overwhelm to get people a little more grounded before we work on some. I use a lot from a lot of different fields. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm actually going to a 2.5-hour sound healing session tonight.
Yay. I'm actually sitting, you can't tell from this view, but I'm sitting in my event venue right now, and we have a corporate group in here tomorrow that is going to do a sound bath in the morning for their employees. So that's kind of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's really cool. All right. So back to behavior change.
That's all behavior change too. It's just different types, right?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things, the other thought that I had out there that came back is, and we talked about corporate messaging a little bit. So going back to corporate messaging, one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to communication, especially in corporate, is this expectation that because we only speak to the conscious mind, or at best we speak to the conscious mind in corporate communication a lot. But there's a tendency to say like, well, here's a message with all the details that you possibly need to know, and that's it. And now let's change behavior. And then it doesn't happen for many, many reasons. And then there's frustration that it doesn't happen. But the behavior of doing communication differently doesn't actually change.
Absolutely. No, I think, so when I try to tell people what I do, and I'm like, yeah, I change mindset and behavior, and they're like, oh, you're a change manager. And I have so many feelings about it, right? I have training in change management, and it is really enlightening to explain to people the differences between change management and changing behavior. Change management typically is focused more on the conscious mind. It's focused on processes and procedures, trying to minimize disruptions, trying to make sure that we're all on the same ship, and that ship is kind of moving in the right direction all together. So there's a lot of, I don't want to say micromanaging, but that's how it can feel sometimes, right? That's kind of change management. Behavior change and mindset change is different depending on what the change is that we're desiring, right? So sometimes I say, okay, this needs to be top down, right? Like, for example, a policy of not sending emails on the weekends. That has to be top down. That's not going to be a bottom up. You're not going to have someone in a low level be like, I have decided the whole company is going to do this, right? There's things that have to be top down, right? And that can be a real struggle. I was working with a leader a couple years ago where she was like all grassroots. Everything had to have support from the bottom coming up. And I was like, no, sometimes, like in this situation, it has to be top down, right? And then there are many times where it should be bottom up. And then you have to decide, is it a department or a subset or a committee that's bottom up? Or is it everybody that's bottom up, which becomes really interesting in large institutions and organizations. My favorite thing that I'm contacted about, my absolute favorite thing, is when people come to me and they're like, we have decided we are now a values-based organization, right? I'm just like,
yesterday we were something else, and today,
right?
We were officially given the sash and the sword, and was a whole knighting ceremony.
We are a values-based organization, right? And I'm like, okay, awesome. Explain to me what that means, right? Because having the training that I have, right, in conscious and unconscious. So the conscious mind, that 5%, is logic, reasoning, and creativity. And so that's why you also see a lot of organizations that are like, we are going to try to cultivate curiosity, because they know it's something they can measure and control, right? Because it's conscious mind. Talk about, okay, goal setting happens in your conscious mind, right? I am going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to work out. New Year's resolutions, right? All of the sales goals, they're all conscious mind, right? And then when you sit there a week later and you're like, oh, I haven't worked out once. Oh, I still grabbed that bag of Doritos or whatever, right? And you're like, why didn't that work? It's because your unconscious mind, right, which is your patterns, your beliefs, your values, that's what's running the structure of the ship. And so when you talk about, I'm now a values-based organization, okay, those are leaders that understand the importance of values. They understand that values are important to actually getting to the decision, but they're going about it completely wrong, right? They like had some executive meeting on a board retreat, or they had some committee, right, somewhere that's like 5 people, and they're like, decide what our values are. And then they spend months tweaking the language, right? They put it in a fancy slide deck or a report, and then they
Posters.
send it out, right? They send it out, and you're laughing because you know, right?
Yes. I already see the eagle, and
Exactly.
then there's the bear on the posters.
And
So
they
true.
all happen to
And
come
then
back
they're
with
like,
excellence
these
and
are our
professionalism.
values. We espouse these values. And then they have a printout. They put it up in the employee workroom. And they're like, and it's in the training. You have like a little business card you carry around with you, right? It's, but it never works. It never sticks because they've gone about it completely wrong, right? There's so much around values. And I'm like, okay, let's take everything you know about being a values-based organization and let's actually look at what that means. Let's start with your employees. Let's start with the people that run the ship. What are their values? And then there's a lot of training around that, because I think I know a lot of people think that they just have one set of values that guide their life. And that's completely wrong. Like if I sat there and said, Alex, what are your values? Or Christina, what are your values? You're going to start to name the important things on what we call the wheel of life, right? If you Google Wheel of Life, it's a very popular concept and term. It typically ranges between 6 and 10 things, but you have family, spirituality, personal development, career, relationships, right? So you have these different wheels of life. So when I ask you what your values are, oftentimes you give me a segment of life, right? You give me, well, family and spirituality are really, really, that's what I value. But it's actually incorrect. And that's how we really struggle with becoming a values-based organization, because we actually, in ourselves, right, we have a different set of values within each wheel of life, right? How I run my family, how I run my relationship, how I run my professional and personal development and my career, they all have different sets of values. Right? In career, maybe I'm achievement or money or success, right, oriented, which I'm not. It's actually a problem sometimes, which I'm not. And then, those would never be values that I have for my family, right? And so then when you look at corporations who are like, we're values based, they're like, yes, well, we have surveyed our employees and they say that like family is really important to them. So we're going to become like a family based organization. I'm like, no, that is not what you're going to become. Like, right?
And then force everybody to come to the office 5
Right.
days a week.
Exactly. And then they'll sit there and say, yeah, well, our employees really care about family. So all of our reward systems now are going to be around like getting 1 extra day off, or having, this kind of family benefit plan within our, like our employee resources. And that's just not true. You have to ask the right questions, like what are the values for you when it comes to your career, right? What's most important to you when it comes to your career? and actually look at all of those things, and then have a grassroots or bottom-up approach of like, okay, all of the people that are part of our company, or the top 50% of people in our company, they all have these values that are aligned, right? Or this department has these values and this department has these values. And then you're bringing it up where now everybody, similar to pain points, they see themselves in those values, right? And if they don't see themselves in your values, then maybe they're not a top performer. Maybe they would be best served in another company. Maybe that's a good turnover, right, to have. And then really focus on like, okay, what are values that we want our company that we feel as an executive team are important to us that are not currently top values within our employees? Can we express the importance, or do trainings or workshops, or talk about values, or help people understand this, and kind of have that mindset or behavior change in that way? It's a totally different approach than that initial email of when people, they're just like, tell me the process to make sure this is the value of our company. I'm like, that's not exactly how it works, right? You can print it out and put it on the employee break room wall, but that does not mean that that's going to be a value that your company is, espousing every day.
Yeah, it's a great example, and it is interesting to know how different it is in family life. You don't take achievement and finance into your family life. It's not your number one goal. It's crazy.
Has to be able to eat, right? I have to pay the bills, right? So, but I don't want that to be a value, because that's a value of scarcity, right? I have to pay the bills. No, like I want to provide opportunity for her to do the things that she wants to do, and that's a whole different like value alignment, right? So.
That's a great way to look at it.
Now, if we can just take this and apply it to giant things like climate change and AI, we'll be good.
There's definitely groups of people who are trying to tackle those sticky, like those hard problems, and those are. It's so funny because when you talk about climate change, like I'm part of a couple groups of helping with some messaging, right? I've been contracted through a couple groups. But the real issue with climate change is that we live on one planet and one world, right? And every country impacts that. And every country has different rules and regulations. So you could get everybody, right? Even within the United States, for the listeners here who are global, on the East Coast, like in the Northeast, right? In Boston and Cape Cod, and on the West Coast, like in California and Seattle and Portland, like there's no plastic bags, right? There's no plastic bags. There's no plastic straws. Everything is not even in Cape Cod. You have to pay for paper bags. Like it is so, and that's in the United States, right? And then I'm in Nebraska here, where it's all the things, right? It's all the plastic straws, it's all the plastic bags, it's all the, what do you mean recycling? Like that's not even part of our things. We're not tracking any of this stuff. I just had a family member visit from California, and we went to the store, and she like literally held up the plastic bag and was like, people still use these? Like it was such a foreign, and that's within one country, right? And so now you talk about globally, I call it a fun problem because I get really like energized by mindset and behavior change. It's such an interesting thing to think about how best to approach it, especially in today's day and age, because the answer is you can't do it through technology because not everyone gets the same information. So then you have to go to like a mailer campaign, but then a mailer campaign is like paper, which is trees, which is hurting the problem, right? Yes. It's a sticky problem. But those are the kind of things that I like to journal about, right?
Well, maybe we could all just become a values-based Earth, and then we'd be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And how do you reach everyone to align those values? Through paper, right?
Yes.
No, let's just have 3 people decide them for the globe. It'll be fine.
Exactly. It'll all be fine. Everyone in the world will listen to this podcast, and then they'll have an aha moment, and then the world will be better.
Yes. Just like that.
Just like that.
I'm thinking Hunger Games types of like in the sky announcements. That's probably what we're gonna have to be
You know,
headed
I'm gonna journal about that tonight, Christina. That's a good idea.
to.
Cannon
No
blast
paper.
goes off. This
Everybody
value is no
sees
longer
it.
valuable.
Exactly.
Yes, we're just going to create a whole force field that like we can project stuff on. And as long as it's the good stuff, right? Because the company that
Exactly.
makes that is going to be a big corporation, and then it's going to be like
Yes.
selling advertisements every 10 seconds.
I know.
So,
I know.
Yeah,
Of the plastic bags that you're trying to eliminate.
exactly.
Is that Orion next to that Nike ad? Who's to say?
Totally. Oh my gosh. I'm going to have some kind of sound clip from this on my LinkedIn. This is so great.
It's Orion jumping on Nike, strapping on the Nike shoes.
You know,
Check that out.
in the future, that's it's sad, but this is the sci-fi that we write today that's going to happen in 20 years. You know?
Oh, it's totally gonna happen. There's
Yeah, I
no
think
way
we're
it's
just
not.
writing a Black Mirror episode right now.
Well, we definitely have at least 7 other tangents that we started and said, like, this is not in scope for this episode. So we may need more than one episode.
Because you know the people know you and they know now me, and they are going to follow all of your content, and they're going to follow us both online, and we're going to talk about how we can create the global screencast system. It's going to be great.
Yes. Indeed. Without the Hunger Games, just the screencast system.
Just a screencast.
Yeah, for sure. So last couple of questions for you. One is, what's your definition of authenticity?
Absolutely. Authenticity to me is being like knowing your values, being aligned with your values, and living your values. And all of those are important. I think when people talk about authenticity, it's like, well, I'm being yourself, right? Authenticity is being yourself. But most often, people don't actually truly know who they are, right? There was a really interesting study done through Google. I believe it was like their vice president of HR or it was done a couple years ago. And they were looking at the common threads between all their top performers, right? So they looked at all their top performers and they said, what's the common thread between them? And it wasn't education, it wasn't language, it wasn't any of these things that we would naturally gravitate towards. And they found that it was their level of self-awareness. So then they did a study of more of their employees, right? And it was an astounding statistic. It was like 90% of people, don't quote me, like 85 to 95, it was up there. Like 85 to 95% of people thought they were self-aware, but they actually were not self-aware, right? If you do a 360 study, people have this filter or this view of themselves that maybe not is how they're actually living out right in their lives. I like to think of my daughter for this, where she's like, I'm a good and kind person. I don't know why people don't want to play with me. And it's like, oh, okay, let's talk about behaviors, right? Let's talk about your tone and your language and how you're snapping and how you are like, I only want to play the games I want to play. I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to do all these things, right? And she's like, oh, right? So sometimes we do things that we just think are just so innate. And so I think that knowing piece is really important, like truly knowing who you are, how you operate, what your values are, and then consciously and unconsciously living those values is truly what is authentic, right? I'm the same person with you all on this podcast as I am with you in person, as I am with my partner, as I am with my daughter, as I am with my colleagues, as I am with my employees, right? I'm the same Kristin. I have the same problems. Now, that doesn't mean that I share every wheel of life with every person, right? So I don't need my daughter knowing about, this, and this over here. And I don't need my colleague knowing about this and this and this with my daughter, right? But I'm not lying about it, right? I'm not intentionally covering it up. It's just a section that I'm choosing not to share. And I think that's a really important differentiation. And I think we can all think of when you think of, maybe you can't define what authentic means, but you can definitely think of someone at some point in your life who has been inauthentic, and
Oh yeah. Yes. That's pretty obvious.
Oh my gosh, I was a professor at a school that I'm not at now, a different school. And there was a faculty member there and everybody loved her. And I was like not to like throw shade right now, right? But I'm sitting there like that how I don't understand like why everybody loves her. Because like the version of her that I was seeing was the one that was like complaining about students all the time and like this person's this and this person's this and she's just like a very bitter like negative person. I'm like, why is every and then I had to like I was a guest speaker for somebody or I was attending some kind of panel in her class and I showed up 10 minutes early and I was just sitting in the back of the room waiting for this presentation or whatever. And I totally got it then because she was a totally like it was a face, it was a mask when she was standing up there and she was like, oh my God, so positive, so happy, so forward thinking. Totally not the same person. And the minute she would leave the student, she'd be like, And so that was the only version I saw of her. And so when I sat in there, I was like, oh, I understand now. Like, I understand why all the students are like, oh my gosh, we love her. She's so great. But it was like two totally different people. It was really eye-opening for me in that moment of like, wow, people, like sometimes we know that people act different, right? Or we say the two-faced or the inauthentic, but to have it there in your face was so extreme. I'm like, I'm never, ever going to be that person, right? So.
Yeah. It's true, though. It's so obvious, especially when you know somebody and then you see them putting a mask or an armor or whatever it is on and you're like, I don't know this person. And if I had met this version of you, we would not be speaking.
Exactly.
Like, there would be no interaction here.
That self-awareness part is so important because you change throughout life, right? I'm not the same person I was before I had a child. And then when I had my child and I was a full-time employee versus like being a business owner and then having a child and being the breadwinner and all of these things, your values can adjust and change just like your love languages, right? For those familiar with love languages, my love language was definitely like quality time before having a child. And then after having a child, like a majority of women by research, acts of service jumped up there, right? I just want you to do something that I don't have to tell you to do, right? Yes. And so we acknowledge that we can change as people. We can acknowledge that our love languages change, but values can also, you have a core set of values in all these areas, but they can adapt and flow and change in priority. And self-awareness really helps you to understand that of like, oh, okay, I didn't have money as a value, so I wasn't making the ask or closing the deal. But I do have a value of being able to provide for my family and give my daughter opportunities, and that requires money. So that money needs to move up or it needs to get linked neurologically. Like I need a neural pathway that links the two of those together so I can actually make decisions and behaviors that align with this value, which is a value that I didn't think I aligned with, right? So that was such a long, wonderful,
it's very fascinating
to just your very simple question of define authenticity.
Is it simple though?
It's not so simple.
No, right? It's not. That's why you're writing a book about it. I'm so excited.
And where can people find you?
That's such a great question. I feel like I'm everywhere now. Simple answers, like you could go to bcdinstitute.com, Behavior Change Design, BCD Institute. I have really quite a large LinkedIn following, and so a lot of people like to follow me on LinkedIn. But I ask, if you're going to look me up on LinkedIn, Kristin Malek, I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. So hit the 3 buttons and hit connect. Don't just follow, right? Because I'd love to see your content too. So people who listen to this podcast are interested in the same things that I'm interested in. I want to follow your content. So if you just click follow, that just means you get my content, but I want yours as well. And since I'm like an influencer or creator, whatever the category is, you have to like do 2 steps to connect with me. So connect with me on LinkedIn, Kristin Malek. And then, yeah, you can, my email's on the website, my other socials and all that stuff's on there. But LinkedIn's my big one. And then the website. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, for sure.
Thanks for sharing all these thoughts, Kristin. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
This was so much fun. When your demand for this podcast is so high, which it will be, because we're
It definitely will
that,
be.
we're manifesting that.
Exactly.
Then we're gonna have to do a part 2, and we'll dive in
Yes.
much deeper. Everyone's gonna reach out with questions. It's gonna be great.
Yeah,
I feel like
we
we
do
have at least
have to
7
like
parts we could do.
exactly. There's a whole one on curiosity, emotion or not emotion,
Yes.
and then I'm sure there'll be others.
Oh my gosh, if we did a debate on that, that would be fascinating. Because I am definitely kind of on an island, but I'm also the one that's cross-trained in all the different fields. Whereas some people come from a very purist perspective of like, no, experience design is emotional design. So,
Maybe we should do a panel
Yes.
with somebody, with Lynn and people like that.
That'd be fun. So, yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for having me. This was so wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you, Kristin.
and thanks for listening.